So now that we have established ATP is necessary for muscle contraction because we continually have to have ATP to bind to the myosin head to overlap the myosin and actin filaments and keep the cross-bridge cycle going, we need to look closely at how muscles get ATP since they need so much of it. So how do muscles derive the ATP necessary to power their contraction cycle? And you're going to see there are progressively longer types of muscle contractions that use different types of ATP. So we can use it for creatine phosphate, anaerobic glycolysis, and cellular respiration. So let's look at each one. Creatine phosphate is similar to ATP in that this is a storage molecule for an extra phosphate. But all creatine phosphate does is this goes to your muscles, it stores a phosphate, so that phosphate can easily be moved by substrate level phosphorylation and transferred to an ADP, adenosine diphosphate, to quickly make ATP to generate muscle contraction. So creatine is in your muscles whenever it takes up phosphate. It is a storage molecule called creatine phosphate that can quickly convert that phosphate to ADP, and you can make creatine. So this only powers muscle contraction for 15 seconds because you can only store so much creatine in your muscles. Creatine supplementation for quick bursts like weightlifting has become something popular, but your muscles can only hold so much creatine and can only power quicker muscle contractions. Again, over 15 seconds, you're going to have to go to the next thing, which is anaerobic glycolysis. You should have covered metabolism in Anatomy and Physiology 1, but once your creatine phosphate stores are depleted, glucose can start to be converted into pyruvic acid and generate ATP. If there's a lot of oxygen present, we go to aerobic respiration, and we're going over 2 minutes. We would continue to cellular respiration, which we'll talk about next. But for about 2 minutes, pyruvic acid can be converted to lactic acid or reduced to lactic acid, and we can make 2 ATP by substrate level phosphorylation by the process of glycolysis, and that does not necessarily require oxygen because glycolysis is the step of cellular respiration that happens outside of the mitochondria. Over 2 minutes, then your cell will use cellular respiration, which has to use oxygen in the mitochondria because oxygen is the final acceptor of electrons in the electron transport chain. So you can use amino acids, fatty acids, pyruvic acid from glycolysis, glucose, all of those, and you can make ATP from these. And you can make the most ATP by this process, oxidative phosphorylation, which is using the electron transport chain. But you must have oxygen, and this is called aerobic cellular respiration because it uses oxygen. And this can power contraction over 2 minutes up to hours, and you can actually condition your muscles to do this longer. Muscles that are going to do a lot of aerobic respiration tend to have a lot of mitochondria in them. Muscle fatigue is the inability to maintain the force of contraction after prolonged activity. If you have tried to do a long workout when you are not conditioned well, or you've done some really strenuous workout, then you definitely have experienced muscle fatigue. There's several reasons that we get muscle fatigue. One of those is you are not releasing calcium adequately from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. We know that is necessary because calcium binds to troponin to allow tropomyosin to roll away from the active sites on actin. So if we don't have calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, we can't continue contraction. We deplete our energy source. We deplete our creatine phosphate, we deplete our oxygen, and we deplete our nutrients. So as we run out of things, we're clearly experiencing muscle fatigue. We build up lactic acid from glycolysis, and we build up ADPs that we're not able to put phosphates back on as we experience muscle fatigue. And we start to have inefficient release or insufficient release of acetylcholine. That ACH stands for acetylcholine, and that's the neurotransmitter used in the neuromuscular junction. All of those things will contribute to our fatigue. One of the interesting things is before we run out of all of these things, we tend to experience central fatigue. And these are changes in the central nervous system that usually cause us to become uncomfortable and stop exercising long before we experience damage to our muscles or clearly run out of everything. And this is probably a protective mechanism. After you stop exercising, especially if you do a lot of aerobic activity, you are going to be breathing really heavily. Why do we continue to breathe heavily even after we stop? Why don't we just stop immediately? They call this paying back our oxygen debt. When we're breathing heavy after we finish exercising, we are allowing our muscles to replenish our creatine phosphate stores that we've used up. We're turning our lactic acid back into pyruvate, and we can use that pyruvate to make more ATP. And we are actually reloading oxygen onto myoglobin. If you remember myoglobin, it sounds like hemoglobin. This is a protein that is designed to hold oxygen. It's only found in our muscle cells. It's one of the things that contributes to the darker red color in our muscles. And diving animals like whales have been found to have a lot of myoglobin in their muscles to keep them making ATP, even at times they're not breathing oxygen under the water. So we do reload oxygen onto the myoglobin we have. Rigor mortis is a state of muscular rigidity that begins 3 to 4 hours after death, and it lasts about 24 hours. So after someone dies, they are going to have rigor mortis set in where they become really, really stiff. And what's actually happening is calcium ions came out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and they cause that cross bridge to form between actin and myosin. But what someone is dead is not doing is producing ATP, where that myosin head can detach and grab again. And then we end up with stiffness. After 24 hours, then enzymes begin to break down decomposing cells, and it becomes soft again.